Just quickly, Marshall Pendergrass is on the call with me, and I were fortunate to go down to Tassie, as we call it, in 2018, and came back. And then, as many of you know from Trout Magazine, Kirk Dieter went down that December. I was supposed to go with him and couldn't go the last minute. And so I've been down many times. It's very, very easy to get down, whether you're from Denver or the Western Slope or wherever, direct to LA or San Francisco and direct to Sydney. Spend a day in Sydney and then zip right down to, there's a northern and southern airport in Tasmania. And as you saw in the promo, on a scale of 1 to 10, Kirk put this in the 15 category. Chris has become a good friend. I've got all kinds of pictures of him hauling me all over the Central Highlands Western Lakes, which are a National Heritage Site. Absolutely incredibly spectacularly beautiful. And as Chris will show you, the fish are modest in size. But I think more than anything, for all of the folks that are on this call, it's an especially unique part of the world. I was down in January, and Chris told me I had the 29th fishing license. In comparison, in New Zealand, I think it was when Kirk looked at it in 2018, they sold something like 10,000 foreign national fishing licenses, and Tasmania sold like 400. So if you want, as they say, uncrowded beaches, phenomenal fishing, fantastic food and people, this is and scenery that's unbelievable. This is absolutely the place to go. A little bit of a pitch. We're working on another trip for the gala in March. Hope to put that together. And all these fish are there because of Chris and his team at Inland Fisheries, which is our equivalent to Parks and Wildlife. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris, who even on his vacation goes fishing out in the Western Highlands Lakes. So Chris, have at it. Thanks for doing this. It's very special for all of us to be able to have you guys kind of take my Irish blarney out of it and tell them the real truth about how great Tassie is. You're on.
Thanks, Mac, for the introduction. Ooh, we're getting some feedback there. So can you hear me okay, Kyle?
Yes, I think you're all good. I just had to take them off speaker. Yeah. We did get a little feedback there.
There was a bit of feedback there.
I'll ask everybody to stay muted if you could. We are recording this and we'll put it on our YouTube channel. And if you want to hold questions till the end, I think we can go over that at the end by using the reaction button and raising your hand, and I can unmute you as I see. It's all yours, Chris.
Thanks again, Mac, for the introduction. Yeah, Mac and Kirk have been down here a few times now, so they are getting a bit of a glimpse of what Tasmania has to offer. And thanks, Kyle, for setting up the presentation. I mean, I know these sorts of presentations aren't easy for anyone from either end. I find that walking into a blank screen is a bit off-putting, but let's see how we go. We've also got a few videos that run through this presentation as well, so hopefully they run smoothly and all goes well. When Kirk was down here, we had some great fishing out in the Western Lakes. So Tasmania is a small island in the southern hemisphere off the bottom of Australia. It's the island state of Australia. The fishing with Kirk was good. I thought it was good, but not spectacular while he was here. And it was interesting to see in Kirk's little black book of fly fishing that came out recently. I got a copy, and he gives Tasmania a pretty good rating. So I think that was pretty So we're just going to run a video here.
At the southern tip of the Australian continent lies a remote island. An immense wilderness, divided by mountains. It's a world of ancient forests, of pristine rivers, and a coastline that's both wild and beautiful. Its animal inhabitants are as extraordinary as they are bizarre. This is a land of black devils and white wallabies, where lights dance in the southern sky and trees tower to 100 meters. This is Tasmania, the weird and wonderful isle at the bottom of the world.
So I think that came through pretty jerky, the vision on that. I'm not sure about the audio, so that's one of those technical difficulties you have when you're trying to run a video on these PowerPoint presentations. But I hope you got the sort of gist of it. So Tasmania has a lot more to offer than just trout fishing. It's a different opportunity to see a whole range of different things. And shortly I'll play a video of the World Fly Fishing Championships, and you'll get some insight there into what the competitors. I'm not a competitive angler, I like going off and fishing out in the backcountry by myself and with friends. So competition angling isn't what I'm about, but it's interesting to be exposed to competition anglers and just have their thoughts of their visit to Tasmania, because you do have true international representation in those events. And we had the World Fly Fishing Championships here in Tasmania for the second time in 2019. So we'll get into that in a minute. But if you're flying from Colorado, pretty much down to Tasmania, as Max said, off the west coast of the US, it's quite easy. You'd fly into either Melbourne or Sydney. From Melbourne, it's about a 1 hour flight into Tasmania, and from Sydney, it's about 2. So it's fairly easy to get here. I guess the other point I'd like to make there, we're friendly. We don't bite. We speak the same language. So it is a bit like New Zealand. It's a very easy place to travel compared to other places in the world. No terrorists, low risk. Great location for families, great location for partners. So there's lots to do on our little island. A temperate climate, so it's the summers, at the moment it's 23 degrees Celsius outside. Winters do get down to, it gets quite cool, but it gets quite cool here, but not overly cool. So we're like a rock in the Southern Ocean. We're 150 miles south of the mainland of Australia, and Bass Strait, which is the piece of water between Tasmania and mainland Australia, is a pretty notorious stretch of water for shipping, especially in the early days with sail ships and things, because the nearest piece of land to the west of Tasmania is Argentina. So it's a long way, and the winds typically blow from the west here, west and southwest, and when it blows from the southwest, we get Antarctic blasts. So it gets quite cold. Tasmania is also doesn't have any high altitude, so we don't have the big snow-capped glacial mountains like you do up through the Rockies and northern US. And that's pretty much what drives our fishery, the way our fishery is structured. And I'll talk about that a bit in a minute, about the brown trout, rainbow trout mixture in Tasmania. But the brown trout are certainly dominant because our weather patterns and conditions are well suited to them. Just a couple of quick stats. Population of Tasmania is 541,000 people on a land mass of 24,900 square miles. So it's a fairly small rock, but it's also a small population. The capital city of Hobart in southern Tasmania has a population of around 250,000. So pretty much half the population lives in Hobart. And just another thing of interest, 42% of Tasmania's land area is either reserved in National Park or World Heritage Area. And Tasmania had the first environmental political party in the world. So very environmentally conscious down here. And whenever the government tries to make any business decisions and things, it's well scrutinised by the environmental sector in Tasmania. We're just jumping out and going to show you so this is a government mapping system we've got in Tasmania. So we've just jumped out of the PowerPoint presentation at the moment. And when you see a map of Tasmania, you think, oh yeah, that's not very exciting. It's a pretty boring little landmass with not much fresh water there. But if we start scrolling in a little bit, you'll sort of see there's some large hydro impoundments, there's some large natural freshwater lakes. And the area I'm going to sort of talk about today, and the area that Mac mentioned at the start, is this Western Lakes area here. So it's a large area to the west of the Great Lake. And again, you'd say, well, there's only half a dozen lakes out there, but this is the World Heritage Area. And as we zoom in, you'll sort of see that there is a bit of water out here. In the area that I particularly like to fish, it's a four-wheel drive track that goes from Lake Augusta out to the Julian Lakes. And we zoom in here, again, it looks pretty boring, but you zoom in and you'll see that there are lots of little lagoons and tarns and waterways, and they're all interconnected and they all sort of flow through. And part of the skill out here is the fishing in Tasmania, typically for fly fishermen, we like visual fishing. So we're looking for rising fish, we're looking for tailing fish, we're looking with Polaroids for fish cruising on the flats, taking dry flies. So this area out in this Western Lake zone, I'll zoom in a bit more, you can see they're all interconnected. So we camp in this area right here, but a typical day walk would take us 20 to 30 kilometres up into these headwaters here. And these lakes, the further you get up into the system, they're all flowing left to right along this mountain range here into this lake. All of these little tarns and lagoons potentially have trout in them. And over the years, you get to know where they are. And after wet seasons, you know where they might have moved to. So they might, on a dry year, might only be as far as this one, but on a good wet year, they'll move right up into these smaller lakes up here. You can see all the interconnectedness of all the waterways, and they might sneak into this one. So it's really hunting and exploring and looking for fish, visually. And quite often you'll walk until you find fish. Most days you find them fairly quickly, but you can walk for an hour and see nothing and the waterway might not have something in it. It might not have a trout in it. So it's really hunting at its best in fly fishing terms. But also for the visiting angler, all of these lakes have lots of good trout fishing. And these are the waterways where the World Fly Fishing Championships were held. They were held on these ones in the Highlands here that are easy accessed. Can be fished from a boat if you need to. I'm typically a bank angler. I like to walk around the edge and look for fish, so boat fishing isn't my strength. But that's sort of a bit of a clip on the area we're going to be talking about. This area west of the Great Lake in the World Heritage Area. Just going to flick out of out of this screen and go back into the PowerPoint presentation. This map is just from our Bureau of Meteorology. Tasmania can be windswept. As I said, it's a rock in the Southern Ocean and 42 degrees south. It's exposed to winds, but looking out the window now, I wish I was trout fishing. It's 23 degrees, overcast, balmy, and I'm sure the mayflies are popping on the Highland lakes, and that'll be the place to be. So our summers are mild, as I said, and the conditions are nice for fishing this time of year. A little bit cold over winter, but it can be a little bit windy at times. So the guys in the World Fly Fishing Championships were exposed to some extreme weather conditions. We'd chosen the first week of December for the championships. It goes over 5 days, thinking, oh, that's the start of summer, it'll be good. And we had an Antarctic blast that they copped it for the full 5 days, and they were exposed to some pretty severe weather. One of the United States anglers, Team USA anglers, was Devin Olsen, and a few of you might know him or have heard of him. And I'm just going to play you a little bit of a video from Devin. Hopefully this runs nicely. And he will mention into it that it was pretty extreme weather conditions he was exposed to. So we'll just run this video quickly.
I'm a member of the United States fly fishing team. This is my 11th World Championship, I think. You had to be flexible and ready for any eventuality, and sure enough, when we got here and the weather became a bit apocalyptic for most of the championship, well, all of the championship, it turned into no mayflies and a polling fest for most of it. So the only venue that really had any done action was here on Penstock, where we're at right now. But for the most part, it was put on some buggers and strip fast and hope that you find some clear water that hasn't been stirred up yet. So it was kind of a shame in that regard that the venues didn't get to show off the way that they normally do. But Tasmania has been a great place. I love just the environment around here. It's strangely familiar with different flora and fauna because I live in the American West, where there's lots of open territory and not many people, and Tasmania is similar in a lot of ways and yet very different, both in its terrain as far as the plateau instead of high mountains, but just a high central plateau, but also all these glacial tarns, which is very familiar from home. We have a lot of high altitude, high country fishing in our mountains for backcountry lakes, so it's been really fun to explore some of those here and see how challenging the fishing is. Here on Penstock, where there's a lot of hungry fish, especially during a good hatch. Most people, if they do things decently, can definitely catch some fish, but those backcountry lakes, they certainly test your skill as an angler, and even then, when you feel like you did everything right, some of them just didn't want to play. They'd come look at your fly and say, no thank you very much. If I could summarize Tasmania, I think mania is the best part of that word. There's so much crazy stuff that happens here when you're between driving along and watching wallabies and wombats and even the odd Tasmanian devil, dodging them as you go in the car, to watching them jump around while you're fishing, to some very large and challenging brown trout that tested lots of skill. It's a maniacal place, but sort of a fisherman's mania. It's not a place, I think, in a lot of it where people might want to come who just want to go catch easy fish. I think this is the fisherman's place, this is the angler's place, not just the fish catching angler's place, because it's a place where you're going to test your skill and be rewarded with some really striking memories for it, but don't expect to just have it handed to you. You're going to have to earn it.
So that doesn't seem to be playing that well from our end, so I hope you're getting the gist of what Devin had to say. Again, I'll reiterate, that's competitive fly fishing. If you're into that's great. Boat fishing was three stages of the fly fishing event. and they had 2 days where they were walking on rivers as well. But if you want the true Tasmanian fishery, it's the walking, stalking style fishing. So if you're into that, that's definitely the place to come. There's an abundance of wild brown trout in Tasmania, and the strength of the brown trout, I've sort of touched on it before, is because we don't have high snow-capped glacial mountains that last all year. The snow that lands here in wintertime typically lasts, a week, and it might drop it again, and you might get it any time of the year. You might get it in, June, July, August, which is our winter, but also you can have snow in December because it blasts up from the Antarctic. So if you're coming, you'd want to allow a few weeks to make sure you got some good weather. You might get two good weeks of weather, but you also might get a bit of a blast in there somewhere as well. So, and be prepared for that. The brown trout do well because they spawn here in April, May, June, and that's typically our wettest period, and that's when the seasons are closed here, the trout season. And the brown trout fry are dropping out of the creeks in October while there's still some water, and if we go into a drought summer, some of those spawning creeks are drying up in November and December. So that's why they do better than the rainbow trout. The rainbow trout from the west coast of the US, of course, have that glacial runoff to allow the fry to drop out, extended into spring and into summer. So you can see a nice big Western Lakes brown trout there. This is the sort of thing that we're hunting. There's a couple of young rainbow trout on top and a young brown trout on the bottom. Our fishery is primarily wild. All of the Central Plateaus, it's all wild fish. We do move some of the adult brown trout out of the spawning creeks from waters where there's an overabundance of fish and put them into other locations to have still wild fish but still have good fisheries. Brown trout were originally introduced into Tasmania successfully in 1864. This was after numerous attempts in bringing brown trout across in sailing ships, and they were trying to introduce Atlantic salmon here, but the Atlantic salmon run was never successful. So the brown trout soon dominated, and we ended up with this, 160 years later, with this fantastic brown trout fishery. We do have a good rainbow trout fishery, but it's minor compared to the brown trout. The rainbows came from Sonoma Creek in California, and they were introduced into Tasmania via New Zealand. The Kiwis got the rainbows first, and we got the browns first, and we did a swap. They got some browns from us, and we got some rainbows from their stock, and that's the wild fishery we've got today. There's just a good brown trout from the Central Highlands. This is one of the ones from a typical hydro lake. The brown trout do well there. You get a whole range of colours. You get really nice golden brown ones. You get silver ones. You get a diversity in the stock because it's wild. And the rainbow trout do well as well. So they can get to a big size in some of our lakes, and some of our streams have got nice sized rainbow trout as well. I sort of say that our fishery is probably more of a lake fishery than it is a stream fishery. Even though we do have lots of streams, our anglers tend to focus on the lakes more. But there is lots and lots of opportunity for stream fishing in Tasmania. Probably a lot of untouched fishing. Mac touched on it earlier on. We have a total licence sale in Tasmania of angling licences each season of about 25,000 anglers, of which 300 to 400 are international. And I think the Lake Taupo fishery in New Zealand alone, just that one licence in New Zealand, has over 60,000 anglers. So most trout in Tasmania die of old age. So this is the sort of fishing we're doing out into the Western Lakes. So it's small lagoons and tarns, varying sizes, and we're walking the edge looking for fish. Here's an example of one that's back out of the water. So typically early mornings and late nights, but also on cloudy days, and more so in springtime when the margins of the lakes are flooded. the fish will come right into the shallows and expose their back. And here's one that I fished to. So you can see they're a reasonable size. They're good trout in shallow water, and it all comes down to presentation. Most of these fish will take a dry fly. They'll be tailing along looking for frogs and nymphs and aquatic insects, but they will readily poke their snout out of the water and take a dry fly. And that was that fish that was tailing there a second ago. And this is just of an evening, similar sort of situation. The fish come right into the shallows and cruise around, exposing their backs. They're hunting for food. And it's pretty exciting fishing. When you take someone to one of these locations for the first time, it's interesting to watch their casting and how nervous they get. But it's the thrill of the hunt and thrill of the chase and thrill of finding these fish out in these locations, which makes the sort of fishery special, I think. And that was that fish. So you can see that one there took a little wet fly that looked like a frog in its mouth, a little fur fly. So your patterns in the springtime that look like frogs and tadpoles and, you know, mud eyes and damselfly nymphs and those sorts of things are really deadly. But also dry flies can be just as deadly. So out in the World Heritage Area, this is the sort of terrain. It's pretty exposed, it's pretty barren, it's windswept. There typically aren't many trees. You can see a few sort of eucalypt trees along the right-hand side there of the hill line, but a lot of low-lying bushes. Some of them are very attractive. You get really nice flowering. You can see a bit of a glimpse of the flower in that front plant. It's probably the end of the flowering season for that scaparia bush, but you get lots of bright colours and exposure. The lakes are crystal clear, the water, like it's, you know, you can drink it. It's beautiful water, low fishing pressure. There's an example of water clarity and the sort of areas that we'd walk along and be using our Polaroid sunglasses on these. These are the blue sky days that we look for up there, looking for big fish that are cruising the rocks. And it's interesting, but sometimes you can walk for you know, some distance and not see a fish, and then all of a sudden, you've probably had the same experience yourself in your fishery over there, where someone flicks the switch and all of a sudden, you know, the black spinner mayflies are coming out of the bushes and the fish just appear, and you'll have, you know, large numbers of large trout all of a sudden, you know, surging and jumping and taking mayflies, which is pretty exciting. So sometimes you've got to put the time in to find these fish. But that's, again, part of the hunt. Again, just a typical scenery shot out in the Western Lakes. You can sort of see the low-lying eucalypt trees along the hill behind. But these are all very pleasant photos I'm putting up, but it can get very windy and be exposed. So you've still got to be able to change to the conditions and be willing to, you know, find fish wherever they are at any given time. Mayflies, the summer mayfly hatch is good here, and that's, of course, you know, premier time to go and chase rising trout. And they'll jump on the spinners as well. So around the shoreline, when they do come into the shore, it's pretty exciting fishing when the trout are jumping to take mayflies. There's a bit of a scenic shot of one little hill of some of the lagoons and tarns that are you find out in the Western Lake. And again, a beautiful blue sky day. It isn't always like that, but even these shallow lagoons here on the sort of left-hand side, the trout come into those during the springtime and it's all flooded, and then get locked in there. They get landlocked into all these little lagoons, and they end up with some large fish in these small lagoons as well. Again, a bit of typical scenery. It's at daylight. Daylight, you find a lot of tailing fish along the shore. So it's a good time to fish, daylight and dark. This guy here, he's one of yours. It's Rick Sable. Rick's a steelhead guide on the Deschutes River. I met him when I was in Oregon a few years ago, and he took me in his jet boat up to the Deschutes to try and catch a steelhead, but we weren't lucky, but that was all right. It was a good day out. So I returned the favour, and Rick came over and spent a week with me walking out in the back lakes. And he had a ball, chasing big trout in the shallow lagoons. Colour variation, just a nice brown trout from one of these back lake lagoons. They vary greatly in colour, typically in good condition. We're going through a period at the moment where we've had a La Nina weather pattern on the east coast of Australia. You might have seen of all the flooding on the east coast of Australia, but for Tasmania, that's been typically good for the brown trout fishing. So the brown trout are in really prime condition at the moment. Our lakes are all brim full, even though it's halfway through summer. And the fishery is as good as it's ever been. So the weather patterns are certainly suiting the fishing. We also have brook trout. I showed you the rainbow trout before, and I showed you the brown trout. We've got a small number of waters that grow big brook trout. Again, they've been introduced from the US, about 100 years ago. Commonly, they're sort of 2 to 4 pound, but some of the fish get up to 8 or 9 pound. So they can get quite big in these lagoons as well. They don't seem to do very well when they're coexisting with brown trout. The brown trout dominate them, so wherever they've been put, the brown trout have typically knocked them out, and they're not there. But there are some waterways where there are no other trout, they do well. Quite often when you're fishing out in the Western Lakes, this is the sort of experience you get. You get the wallaby sitting on the bank, watching you. Wildlife abound. I think Devon said in that video that it's like fishing in a zoo. There's just animals everywhere, and they're all friendly. There's nothing that'll eat you, which is a good thing. No bears or lions or cougars, so it's typically friendly animals. So it makes it a nice place to fish. They'll sit there and watch you while you're fishing away. Wombats, so they're just a burrowing animal. Oh, it hasn't come up. There it comes now. Sorry, things are a bit slow with the screen. Sorry. Wombats, they're a burrowing animal. They're just friendly. They're just wandering around everywhere. Typically nocturnal, but you do see them during the daytime. And of course, you may have heard of the platypus. We don't have beavers or otters or things like that, but we have platypus down here. So here's a little video of a platypus. This video is interesting in what's happening here. This is in an estuarine area down on the edge of the tidal part of a river. We get good whitebait runs. It's similar to Argentina, where they get the big trout pushing in on the whitebait runs, and the whitebaits sort of work along the edge of the stream, and the trout will come charging in and feed on the whitebait. You can see the fish working this school of whitebait here, bow waving through the water, taking them. It's pretty exciting fishing as well, very visual. So that's another part of our fish. Our fishery is very diverse. There's a bit of everything for anyone, what you want to do. And the interesting twist to this one here in a minute, this trout was feeding on this school of whitebait and chasing them around and getting a good mouthful. And then all of a sudden he has a friend visit. You'll see it in a second. All of a sudden he had a platypus there with him. And the platypus is also feeding in along the edge, and the trout almost comes in and bounces off the side. If you watch here in a second, you'll see the trout. The trout will come cruising in and chasing whitebait off the side of the platypus. There's the trout coming in there now. Again, wildlife abounds. It's all friendly wildlife. These creatures are all there just enjoying life and not worrying about us. The Tasmanian devil, you've probably heard of the Tasmanian devil through Warner Brothers. This is a real one. Hot summer's day. These are typically nocturnal as well. You don't see many during the daytime, but this is a young one. This is a young devil. We call these ones echidnas. It's an echidna. It's a bit like a porcupine, but again, it's an egg-laying mammal. So it's called a monotreme. They one of the few species in the world. There's only two that lay eggs and are mammals. So they're an interesting animal. They wander around. They eat ants out of the logs and burrows. We have a biting ant here called a jack jumper. It's a little ant that when you go near it, jumps around and it can bite you. But these things will stick their nose down the nest of a jack jumper's nest and eat them flat out. And I don't know how they don't get bitten, but they seem to handle it okay. You've probably heard about the scary snakes in Tasmania. So we have 3 species of snake. This is a tiger snake. You can see the stripes on it. We have a copperhead snake, and we have a small grass snake. It's the size of a large worm. They're all highly venomous, but they're also rarely does anyone get bitten because their jaws are built so they don't strike well. For their fangs are pointing backwards, so they're not overly efficient. And I don't know the last time someone in Tasmania was actually bitten by a snake. I think it was a schoolgirl back in the 1980s got bitten, but it's fairly rare for people to be bitten. But we do train them to catch our trout, so that's one of the good things we do. I'm just going to finish off the presentation before we go to questions with another little video. This guy here will introduce himself, but he ended up winning the World Fly Fishing Championships. And along with Devon Olsen, this guy is Howard Croston. We kept a number of the internationals on for a week after the World Fly Fishing Championships and exposed them to what I think is the true Tasmanian fishery, not the competition fishery. And here is what Howard has to say. I hope this plays well and runs smoothly. So we'll just let this run through.
You're looking at probably, you can see this sort of rock down in here.
Yeah.
So it's that type of thing. They tend to sit in front of the rocks, not behind them here for some reason. And I reckon you're going to be in water about this deep. Yeah. Big rainbow, is it?
Big, massive rainbow.
That's all right. You can go get it.
Hi, so my name's Howard Croston. I'm the captain and the manager of the England team. I've been over for the World Fly Fishing Championships as a competitor as well. It's been a really awesome time in Tasmania, to be honest. The result went pretty well in the end. We came out 8th as a team, and I was fortunate enough to come in top spot individually. So that was a pretty awesome experience and really sort of put the cream on top of an incredible trip, I would say. Fishing during the competition was tough, but it was still extremely good quality fishing. I've caught probably some of the best looking brown trout I've caught anywhere in the world, and I've been really fortunate. I've fished all over the world for trout and a lot of other species, but the trout fishing's been really second to none, and considering the weather, that makes it even all the more impressive, to be honest. So yeah, a good part of Tasmania we've sort of covered in the practice, and we've fished quite a lot of rivers and a lot of different lakes, both before and after the competition. And really, I think that the thing that's sort of surprised us the most and impressed us the most is really the variety and the sheer amount of the fishing that's available. Considering there's been so many of the world's best fly anglers here, we've basically seen nobody. So for all them fishermen to be absorbed and all experience really good fishing, really just shows how much good stuff there is. We've fished a wide variety of lakes, and we've fished everything from dry flies to stripping streamers to even sight fishing. in some of the clearer waters, and it's just been the fishing's really been second to none. I think probably I've had a couple of glimpses of really what Tasmanian fishing can be at its very best because of the weather and because it was tough. And one of those was on Penstock when there was a huge hatch of duns, but only for a very, very short time, and the fishing just went crazy. And I had 3 really, really incredibly quality big brown trout in 15 minutes, around that sort of 3.5, 4 pounds mark, and to get 3 fish like that in 15-20 minutes of fishing just, you know, sort of shows you what the potential is over here. So that was one of the highlights. So the number one thing I would tell people about Tasmania is, number one, it's like fishing in a zoo. There's so much wildlife around you. You see so many things. It's mind-blowing if you've never done it. And probably the second biggest thing is you have to come and try it. I've overlooked Tasmania for years, and I wouldn't have been here, to be fair, if it wasn't for the World Championships. But that was a mistake. You know, of all the places in the world that I've always wanted to go, Tasmania probably wasn't top of the list. It should have been in the top 3, without a shadow of a doubt. It is really that good.
So as Howard and Devon both mentioned, I mean, it's not a place to come and catch lots of fish. If you're going to come here, you may catch lots of fish. You might strike one of those dun hatches or one of those spinner falls or some of those great whitebait feeders, and have some super fishing. But I think if you're planning a visit to Tasmania, the difference between us and New Zealand is you've got the whole experience here. You're going to get the whole lot, the wildlife, the people, the climate's good. It's the lot. So it's definitely it's a place worth thinking about, and something just a bit different. So with that, Kyle, I'm happy to go and take questions.
That's great, Chris. Thank you very much. It's amazing how those brown trout were almost tailing like a bonefish. Almost.
Yeah,
Cruising
a
around.
lot of the fishing's like that.
Yeah.
The Tasmanian anglers that go and fish the bonefish flats on Christmas Island or the Cocos Islands and those sorts of places typically do pretty well. First of all, because we spot fish, we spend all our time visually looking for fish. A lot of the western lakes that we're looking at have a beach. They have a beach shore and a rocky shore, an undercut bank shore. So those beaches are just like bonefish flats I imagine you have in Belize or the Bahamas or Cuba or somewhere. And the other thing that's a strength for Tasmanian anglers is that we fish in the wind, so we can handle that a little bit as well. So. Yeah. But I think when we were talking the other day, you were asking what size rod I would typically fish with. I fish with a 4-weight. That's sort of 90% of my fishing. If it's a really, really windy day, I might go up to a 6-weight. But typically, because you're not casting long distances and you're looking for fish, you can normally position yourself, with your back to the wind and be able to cast short distances. And, a 9-foot 5-weight rod with anywhere between, depending on how you're fishing, between a 9-foot and 14-foot leader would be what you'd be using. If it's clear water and dry fly, you might go up to 14 foot, but typically in those spring feeding fish, 9 foot's more than enough.
That's great. We had a question from Gregory. He is asking, what were the native game species in all these lakes before browns and rainbows were introduced?
So native fish, yep. So very few. So the early white settlers, when they came to Tasmania, one of the reasons they got really interested in bringing Atlantic salmon to Tasmania was there was no freshwater sport fish. There are a lot of native, what we call galaxid. There's galaxid species in Tasmania. There's about 13 of them. Some of them are endemic only to one water, and that's part of the role of inland fisheries. We make sure we don't stock waters where there are some of these threatened species. But most of there was nothing. There's a river blackfish which grows to about 2 pound, and it's a bottom dwelling fish like an eel almost. So between the blackfish and we also have native eels, there wasn't much else to catch. So those early white settlers, like everything else they transferred around the world, they brought brown trout, they brought blackberries, they brought willow trees, they brought all those things. And we've lived to sort of try and, well, we're managing that, and we make sure we protect our natives where we can. But none of them are true sport fish. You know, a galaxid, probably a typical length would be 4 inches. And a big one, a big spawning one in a lake might be 6 or 8 inches.
All right. I think you might have answered this, but does Tasmania have the poisonous snakes and insects that are present in Australia?
Yeah, everyone seems to be scared. I think even Kirk in the little black book sort of mentions about, you know, the snakes here. But, you know, like I've just come back from 7 days out in the back lakes fishing. I saw 3 or 4, you know, tiger snakes as I was walking around. They're typically going in the other direction when they see you. They're more scared of you than you are of them. And if you're unlucky to stand on one something, you know, they're pretty inefficient in actually striking and getting you. So you don't hear of anyone getting bitten. They're more of a pleasure to see. I've got a bit of video footage on my iPhone the other day of one cruising around the edge of the rocks nearby where I was fishing. It was taking black spinners out of the air. It actually was taking the insects out of the air, grabbing them. So they're more fun to watch than you go.
Kind of like the bears.
And yeah, no bears, lions, you know, anything like that. So, you know, if snakes are the most thing you got to worry about, it's pretty safe.
We have a few more questions, and you know, if anybody wants to ask these in person, you know, feel free to use the reaction button and just raise your hand. And Blake asks, is the area good for backpacking, camping, touring, and fishing, or is it more 4-wheeling and base camping?
There's everything. So you can fly into, you know, Hobart or Launceston, hire a camper van, you know, drive to all the nearby close, all those Central Highland lakes where there's roads and access areas and camping areas. You can go the next step and drive that camper van if you wanted to out into the near Western Lakes, jump out with your backpack and your 1 or 2 man tent and go for a walk for as long as you want out into the wilderness. It's easy, safe walking. It's a bit undulating, the countryside. There's no huge mountains or anything, so it's fairly easy country to traverse. Mac might not agree. He'll be smirking in the background there, I reckon, going where I dragged him the other day over the tundra. But so for whatever level you want. So if you're older and you can't walk a long way, there's certainly the lagoons and lakes where you can grab a boat, grab a guide, go and fish some of the mayfly hatches on those waters. You can drive to waters you can walk around easily and have sort of day fishing, or you can go as far and as extreme as you want.
Great. Another question is, do you have a sea run fishery, and has the spay craze hit Tasmania?
Yeah, spay. No, it hasn't really. There's a guy called Peter Morse that's a casting instructor from mainland Australia. He's been coming down each summer and teaching people to spay cast. I think that the reason why it typically hasn't taken off here because we don't have a lot of big rivers. You saw that photo or the Howard Croston video where that was a fairly big stream, but most of these streams are, you know, you can cast them with this, you know, single-handed fly rod. So there hasn't been a big need for it, I don't think. And the sea run fishery, yes, yeah. So there's a bit of a diversity. Like Hobart, 250,000 people, but on the doorstep of Hobart, you can walk out the door there and chase sea run trout right in the city, or you can go to the wild west coast and get in a canoe and paddle down the river and be on the Southern Ocean with waves breaking on the beach, and the sea run trout are coming through the surf with the whitebait schools into the Tannin rivers of the west coast. So there's a whole diverse range of fisheries there.
Great. Let's see, we got one more. Are there restrictions on wading gear and concerns about invasive species like mud snails? Yeah,
great question. So our biosecurity department in Tasmania, there are really strict guidelines about coming into Australia first up, but then also into Tasmania if you have freshwater fishing gear and if you've been on farm and rural places. So they check you for that. But pretty much all they ask you to do is to make sure that your equipment is clean and dry and it's been dried for 48 hours and ideally been sprayed with a disinfectant if you can. But if you bring dry, clean wading boots, we're not like New Zealand where there's a ban on felt soles. We don't have Didimo in Tasmania, so we've been lucky. We've been able to keep that out for the last 20 or 30 years from New Zealand, even though anglers go backwards and forwards between Tasmania and New Zealand regularly. But our quarantine processes seem to work well, but they aren't that difficult to comply with.
Right. Well, let's see, we got another one. Would it be reasonable to just target rainbows or brook trout?
You could. I wouldn't come to Tasmania to target brook trout, but if you were here and you wanted to chase one down, there's certainly the opportunity. It's certainly a very minor fishery. There's only 3 locations where you can find them, and it's very hit and miss. The people that do chase them, to put them on have them on their bucket list and chase them, they typically have to work hard for them. But rainbows definitely. I mean, the Great Lake, which was it's in the centre of Tasmania. That's like the hub of the Central Plateau, and all the roads go around the Great Lake, has a fantastic rainbow trout fishery. And we have the fishery on the Great Lake is wind lane fishing. I don't know if you do that in the US on your large lakes, but the wind lanes early in the morning that are the midge hatches that come off on the cold frosty nights, the midges get in big thick scums down the wind lanes, and the rainbow trout get up in the wind lanes with their backs out of the water. It's deep water, but they get out in the deep water and they're cruising along, just taking mouthfuls of these midges that hatch. So you can certainly chase rainbows. They're around the shores of some of the lakes where you can Polaroid them. I wouldn't say they're not uncommon. The Great Lake fishery is probably 20 to 30% rainbow and 70% brown trout. But certainly plenty of opportunity. And you're more than likely going to come across a rainbow while you're here. You're going to encounter them.
Right. And Thomas followed that up with PS. That brook trout picture was amazing. How big was it?
Yeah, I think that one was about seven pound. I've caught them that size. I mean, there's one lake in particular. It's in the bottom of the World Heritage Area. It's called Clarence Lagoon, and I've probably fished it 20 times with the fly. And probably the first 15 times I didn't see a fish. On the 16th time I went there, I caught 3 fish that was 3.5, 5.5, and 7.5 pound. And I've been back 3 times since and I haven't caught one. So it's really hit and miss. So if you're just here for a few weeks, you might luck one. If you want to, it's a nice location to go and fish because it's in the Wilderness World Heritage Area. It's easy to get to, but you wouldn't want to be banking on catching one.
Great. Are there any other questions? How about Chris? What do you think are the biggest conservation challenges you face for your inland fisheries?
I think it's across the world. Climate change is certainly having an impact on us, and at the moment, it's helping us with these La Nina weather patterns. But what we're typically finding is we're going from one extreme to the other. We've had 3 years of La Nina, but from 2000 to 2009, we had the worst drought on record. So we had really low water levels. Some of our shallow, fertile fisheries were struggling from turbidity. And when you compound that with agricultural use, they're the times when the farmers need the water most. Because when the droughts are on, there's huge competing interest for the water. So that's the biggest issue for us is the demand for the use of water at those critical times. Years like this year, there's water for everyone. That's fine. But in those drought years, there's a lot of pressure on the government to supply water for irrigation and farming use. So I think New Zealand's going through the same process, and we're also in the process of the government's trying to increase agriculture, dairy agriculture, and we're seeing in New Zealand the problems they're having there with all the dairy industry and stuff, and they're trying to resolve it, many years after the problem's been caused. So it's just interesting from a person that's worked in fisheries management for the last 34 years to still believe that we can make the mistakes that other people are making in the world. But I guess that's politics.
So we got one more. Has there been any attempt to introduce grayling?
No, but we do have a native grayling that lives in the estuary. Only grows to about 1.5 pounds. Will take a dry fly, but they're a species of their own. So no, that hasn't been done. I don't think Tasmania is not in a situation after those early settlers brought those fish in. We're not in a situation where we're looking at reintroducing anything. You know, we're happy with our wild brown trout fishery. That's certainly the strength of. That's why you'd come to Tasmania. You come here to have visual fishing for wild brown trout, and rainbows and brook trout are a bit of a bonus, but we're certainly not looking at introducing anything else.
I think we had somebody raise their hand. No. So Barbara asks, when we were there were recent wildfires. Do these fires have an impact on the fishery?
Yeah, to a certain degree. It's not always measurable. We had some a couple of years before the World Fly Fishing Championships, and one of the lagoons that was involved in the championships, Little Pine Lagoon, it's a really well-known mayfly fishery in Australia. The fire was all around that. We didn't see, we couldn't measure the effects of it. Again, you're not getting huge, great forest fires up in the Central Plateau. It's more tundra burning, like it's burning of lowland stuff. There was no measurable effects on the fishery that we could see. You know, the trout didn't deteriorate. There's potentially a little bit of turbidity stuff going on there, but it's really hard to detect because of the flushing that occurs over winter. But Australia is known for wildfires, and Tasmania certainly has that as well at times, but I think it's worldwide these days, isn't it?
Sounds like it. We had another question. Is it all catch and release, or can you take fish in the backcountry?
You can. Most of those backcountry lakes have got a 5 fish bag limit, but you know, I was out there with my 3 mates the other week fishing for 7 days, and I think one of them took 1 fish home at the end of the week. So most of the fly fishermen that are fishing those areas realise that the big fish, you know, are very special, and we'll catch and release them and be very careful with them. But there are a lot of fisheries that are overstocked. There's certainly lots and lots of fisheries, especially some of the big hydro lakes with very good recruitment and spawning, where the size of the fish is small, you know, 1.5 pounds is a good fish. They're the ones we target in the spawning runs to catch adult fish to move to other waters. We do that in preference to using a hatchery. So we've got it's a whole other presentation. I can probably give it some time, but there's a presentation on how we trap our wild brown trout runs and use those wild brown trout for stocking elsewhere. So it benefits the water you're taking them from, but you're also putting instant adult brown trout into other lakes as well, where there are, you know, popular fisheries close to population centres. So that's the way we manage that rather than relying on a hatchery.
Right.
Did that answer the question? Partly, probably.
I think so. It's nodding yes. Can you give us an update on the latest on the wind farm proposals?
Yeah. Well, again, I think it's pretty contentious around the world what our energy sources should be. At the moment, Tasmania produces 110% of its renewable power from hydro and wind farms. So we ship power in an underwater cable across Bass Strait to mainland Australia, and that puts demands on our hydro storages. And again, Tasmania is looking for opportunities to be able to supply more power into it's the east coast grid of Australia. So that puts pressure on resources and things. And of course, there are, you know, wind farms that have already been built, and there's also wind farms that are being proposed in areas that are contentious. But I think, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, Tasmania has a really strong green community. So the government doesn't always get away with what it wants to do, and everything's questioned and everything's thoroughly looked at.
Great. I think we have one more here, and it's a good one to finish on. Is there anything special to dine on that we wouldn't taste here in the States?
Yeah, our seafood in Tasmania is good. I mean, we've got, I don't know, abalone. I don't know if you've heard of abalone. That's a it's a delicacy, like it's a large shellfish that they die for. The Tasmanian scallop is it's a scallop of its own. It's really nice. Our deep water sea fish here are great. We have good tuna fishing off the coast. We have our kingfish. We have a whole range of saltwater species that the saltwater guys chase for sport fish. What would there be that'd be special? Oh yeah, I'm just looking at Vanessa, who's been helping me a bit. Kangaroo meat. There you go. Come and eat some of our wallabies. Yeah, it's a really it's a good meat. So people do. There is a market for wallaby meat. So yeah, it's high in protein and no fat.
Great.
Guaranteed to put a bounce in your step.
Well, Chris, thank you very much for joining us. I hate to make the joke, but from the future, we really appreciate everything you do. And Mac, do you have anything else to add? I don't know if he's still there.
I can, if you can put me somewhere where people can hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay. All right. I was just going to say to everybody, Chris is always very understated, but Howard, who you saw in there, he had the Hardy hat on. He actually designs all the Hardy fly rides. To give you an idea how great it is down there, when I left toward the second week of January, Howard was about to arrive with, I think she had just become his wife, correct? They went on their honeymoon to Tasmania, and he can go anywhere in the world. So and one of the other world championships after being down there, moved his family down and guides. People asked about food. The food is across. I'd say the food is like being in Provence. The wines have become absolutely fabulous, and all that know me know I like wine. The food everywhere is fantastic. The scenery and the people. Chris didn't touch on the Midlands, but it's like being in the Midlands of England. The cities or the two town cities date from the early 1800s. The people are incredible, and I had a glass of Lark, which is one of the local whiskeys, and I will tell you it was probably better than any Scotch I have ever had. And that's the level of things in Tassie. It's just, it takes my heart away every time I'm there. And as you all know, I travel a lot. I can't say enough about what a unique place it is to be, easy to get to, and absolutely well worth the trip every time. And I go every year. Sometimes I try and go twice. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Mac. Again, thanks, Chris. Thanks everybody for joining us. This will be posted on our YouTube channel, and stay tuned for future Streamside Chats. Thank you again, Chris.
See you, everybody.